I would like to welcome you all here today. This is a wonderful crowd. I think this man must have a following. Of course. Just a few quick announcements. One is we always would like to acknowledge where we get the funding to bring people in for these kinds of events, and that's from New Mexico Arts and from the National Endowment for the Arts. I have to then put in a pitch for our donation jar back there because we're not sure we're going to get that funding anymore. So please help us out if you can. We're very fortunate. Oh, I have one other quick announcement. We have a special guest here today. Where's Anna Beal? Anna, stand up. The reason I'm having Anna stand up, I have on a t-shirt here, she's doing a wonderful project right now in Torrance County. She's trying to find every single artist in the county and every single place that is willing to hang their work. And she's just being a trooper. This is one of the t-shirts from what she's doing. So I just want to acknowledge her because it's quite a wonderful project that she's doing. And now for Mr. Mulhouse. He told me that he has been doing this project here in New Mexico since 2009, finding all these wonderful places that we're going to see about today. And as you all know, he's got his book for sale here. And I'm sure there was something else I was going to say about him, but I'm going to let him say it. So thank you all for being here.
Well, thank you all for being here. Can you all hear me? Is this coming through? So it is fantastic to be here. I actually gave a talk down the street in 2016, so almost 10 years ago. So I've done a lot more ghost town work since then. As this title says, from the Old West to the atomic bomb and beyond. So we're going to cover a whole lot of ground in the next 50 minutes or so. This is the First Presbyterian Church of Thailand, which is a ghost town gem. A lot of these sites are going to be on Highway 60 actually, so if you got time after this, you can hop on the road and go see a few of them. So where this talk is going to go, so I'm going to start with a little bit about how I ended up spending so much time in ghost towns, because that's not necessarily a common thing to do. And then some definitions and types of ghost towns, because it's not always obvious what we mean when we say a ghost town, believe it or not. And then a short survey of some of the types of towns we have here in New Mexico that might be considered ghosts. We have a few reasons why towns become ghosts. And then I'll end with a little ghost town philosophy, just some fun stuff to talk about, to maybe get some questions going afterwards. So this is a convent, in Harding County, which is just totally wide open. Lots of ghost town remnants up there. This convent was built in 1897, closed in 1970, I believe, and Roy is the birthplace of Western swing, it's about the place where Bob Wills did his thing. So there's often a pretty big histories with these ghost towns. So they're obscure, they're kind of out in the hinterlands, but you'll find really big stories tied into a lot of them. We'll talk about some of those. I'll get this right eventually. So I started taking photos when I was actually almost 30. I never owned a camera. I had never taken a photo for any reason. I was going to grad school in Augusta, Georgia, and I was doing a lot of science. I have a master's degree in botany, of all things. And so I wanted to just do some creative stuff. So I found these old buildings around town that were just derelict, and they were very old. I'm from Minnesota. The snow and ice destroys everything, so you would never see a building from 1799 just open to the elements where I'm from. So I began to photograph these because I knew that they weren't going to last too long, that they were definitely in danger. So this is the Goodale Inn, built in 1799. It was basically abandoned. I could just go in there and walk around as could anybody else. When I took the photo, I didn't know these things. I didn't know that it was one of Georgia's oldest unaltered buildings. I didn't know it was on the National Register. I found that out later. I was just attracted to the old building and the aesthetics and that kind of thing. This building sadly was torn down in 2017. It's no longer there. It was bought by an owner who hoped to restore it, and in that effort, the wall fell down, and that was the end of the Goodale Inn. So there's a lot of sad stories, and we'll see a few more of those, but we'll see a big success at the end, actually. So really it's photography that led me to my interest in history. Photography is still sort of what drives my exploration. I shoot a lot of film because it takes a lot of money and it's difficult, and if you mess up then you kind of have to pay for it, which means I don't like to take many photos. I don't have the patience for post-processing, and I don't have the patience to take 1,000 photos and color correct. So I try to take one or two of every place and move on. And film helps me do that, and then I like the aesthetics of it. I like things like this. This was a picture that was taken with a Woka 120G camera that we'll see in a second. It's a medium format. This is the Escondido School down in Socorro County. This is a Pentax K1000 that I abandoned in Knoxville, Tennessee when I was living there because the frame adjust was broken. This was 2006. I would never do that now. Film has actually come all the way around again, and now there's a lot of interest in film. You can buy film at Walgreens. These cameras are coveted. I would definitely get that fixed now, but in 2008, nobody was paying attention. So there's the camera on the right. We'll see some more photos from this one. It's got light bleeds, it's hard to control, it's artsy. I like that, I can't help it. This is my workhorse camera. There's nothing fancy about the Minolta Maxim 5. That's it right down there. I'm still using it. That's my second one. The first one was destroyed in a monsoon in Dog Canyon at Alberley State Park, 10 in the morning. It's no joke. Don't get stuck in a monsoon. It was totally unexpected. Came up the canyon, lightning all around. We're lucky that only the camera got destroyed because that's the only time I've really been stuck in a full-on monsoon. It was not good. So I use, now, like I said, you can buy this film at Walgreens, which you couldn't for a long time there. But I use stuff I buy on eBay, expired films. So as we go through, you might see some photos that look a little weird. Sometimes those are strange film stocks or expired film or whatever I had on hand at the time. This in the background here is a bag from the record store I went to when I was a kid, when I was 14. 15 years ago, they had only CDs. You go back to that record store now, and it's all vinyl LPs, which is what I've bought the whole time. So really, this analog stuff has come full circle, which I really like. So in 2014, I started doing a blog. I finished grad school. I had a little downtime. This was the age of blogs. I think that age is maybe past, but I called it City of Dust. That's a reference actually to the red clay of Augusta, Georgia, not the dust of the Chihuahuan Desert, which is an easy thing to think, because I started writing about the stuff I was seeing in Georgia. This, however, is a much later post from 2015. This is a post on Cedarvale. That's the Cedarvale School, which some of you know quite well. It's in continually worse shape every time I see it. In fact, it's so dangerous now you probably don't want to even stick your head inside, but it is a beautiful little structure. Over here is this auditorium and basketball court. It's just massive. This must have been quite a place. So I started to write the histories of these places as best I could find them, and there's often not very much out there. On places like Cedarvale, there's not much history. So I just kind of cobbled together whatever I could. And then the thing I didn't expect was that people would actually leave their personal recollections. So a lot of the stuff that I know about these places is actually from former residents or people whose families live there telling me about them. And here's one. Here's someone who left a comment about Encino, talking about their dad, Henry Boots R., who managed the old Rio Pecos Oil Company station in the 1940s in Encino. And his dad actually bought the station from Ollie Williams. We'll hear about the Williams family from Negra in a second. He bought some land from the Harrisons. He owned the Harrison house. And he sold this property to a guy named Buttermilk, Buttermilk Dennison. And then eventually, it looks like he still owned the Harrison house at that time. I don't know if that's still the case. I don't know who this person is. You don't happen to be here, do you? Some people from Encino are definitely here. Yeah, so I got a lot of anonymous stuff. I don't know who left these comments, but I'm glad they did. This is the Harrison house in Encino, which I know a lot of you are familiar with, right there on the corner in Encino. Sadly, it has totally collapsed.
Yeah. I noticed that last time.
So I moved to New Mexico in 2009, and this was actually one of the first areas that I photographed, Highway 60, and that would have included the Harrison House. And instead of just the buildings that I would find in like Augusta, I would find basically whole towns that were pretty depopulated with a lot of historic buildings. So I got to spend time exploring, entire villages. I heard a lot about the Harrison House. There were 14 kids raised in this house. They had a 5-seater outhouse.
No.
Which, I mean, I can't imagine all 5 being used at the same time. It must have been. And I just learned today by someone who knows these things that when this door was taken, someone came and took the door, and that's finally what made the house fall down. So it is collapsed. So after doing this for about a decade, I got a chance to just compile all the stuff from the blog and put out this book, Abandoned New Mexico, Ghost Towns, Endangered Architecture, and Hidden History. The Abandoned New Mexico part is the publisher's series, so I didn't get to choose that. The subtitle, there's all kinds of stuff in here. It's not just ghost towns, it's also places like the Mills Mansion, the St. James Hotel, and the Schaefer across the street there. So that's in the Hidden History or the Endangered Architecture section. It is mostly places that you would consider ghost towns. I think there's 40 locations in here. And I have enough for the second volume if I could just quit my day job and just work on this full time. So this came out in 2020. It's been out for about 4 years. And the interest in New Mexico, I can tell you, is huge. This doesn't have much to do with me. It's about New Mexico. It sold almost 4,000 copies, which vastly exceeds what I had expected. People are really interested in this history. So we should define what a ghost town is. Is it a place that's inhabited only by ghosts? This is Elizabethtown up near Taos, looking out across the Moreno Valley towards Mount Baldy. We got this cemetery. Is there nobody in a ghost town? And actually, it's pretty rare to find places where there's nobody. Just to the left out of the frame here, you would find some residences, I think a trailer and maybe an actual house. So it's pretty rare to find a place with nobody in it. And so this is the definition that a lot of people use when they talk about ghost towns. It's a place where the population is significantly smaller than at its peak, which means it doesn't have to be zero, and the main reason it came into existence has disappeared. This is a definition that's also used by Philip Varney, who wrote one of the seminal ghost town texts in New Mexico, Mexico's best ghost towns. He did Colorado, he did Arizona. He's still out there. I've never met him. I've actually been told he's kind of a curmudgeon, which makes sense for people in ghost towns. Here we have the Williams House in Negrin, just up the road here on Highway 60. This is a beautiful old farmstead. Obviously, it's in pretty rough shape. And you would think that a house like this might be in a ghost town, but just across the street is a ranch where some folks still live. So Negrin is inhabited, even though I would consider it a ghost town. Just a quick little diversion here. So Dixie Boyle took this fantastic photo, this mural from the Encino Gymnasium, which has been torn down. There were maybe 4 or 5 murals.
There were 4 of them.
Four of them. Just fantastic murals, and luckily she got these photos and sent them to me. They're gone, but you can still see the pictures. Just fantastic stuff, painted in the early 1940s, I believe.
Right.
And she lived right in that house, right there. So really,
those murals were that size, the size of that picture there? That's how big those murals were.
I might let Dixie answer that.
Well, they were the size of the whole thing up there, not just a little picture.
No, the size of his.
Right.
Of his slide, that's how big the mural was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually
The actual
cropped
white outline that you have there, that's how big they were.
I cropped a little bit of it, so it was actually a little bigger. It's obviously been damaged, so I cropped some of the damaged area out of it. Sadly, they were already
pretty good sized murals.
big murals. Yeah, really cool. And that might have been one of the ways we actually first met, was through
I think so.
exchanging some-
Yeah, he was
Very cool.
researching
That
that.
was a long time ago.
It's a long time.
So New Mexico has 4 reasons why towns have become ghosts, and that's pretty unusual. Most states don't have that many different things going on. So mining is a big one, beginning in the mid to late 1800s in terms of European settlement. Mining really got booming. So we have settlements popping up because of gold and silver and copper, and then everyone knows the Boomtown story. As soon as those mines played out, The tents literally got folded up and people left and went to the next boom town. This is Hanover in Grant County. People live in Hanover, but the mines aren't working. This particular mine, headframe, this area is famous for some strikes that occurred up here, some minor strikes. These were documented in a movie called Salt of the Earth, which used local miners as actors. In that movie, Hanover was called Zingtown. So it's really an interesting slice of New Mexico history, and worth checking out. It's out actually for free on YouTube now. For a while it was banned by the House Un-American Activities Committee, so you couldn't see it. Now you can see it on YouTube. Here's another one in our neck of the woods, this little homestead here. So agriculture is a big reason for ghost towns. Obviously in the late 1800s, early 1900s, a lot of people came out. Homesteaders came west. We all hear the 40 acres and a mule. That's really a reference to the Homestead Act of May 20th, 1862, where you could get up to 160 acres. If you could prove up on your land, you would get to keep it. Now, a lot of people came out on the railroad in wagons, and they saw the land that was assigned to them, and they just turned around and went back. So in this case, this person made a go of it. This is on the Negra Trail, south of Negra. Looks pretty desolate out there. I assume they tried to do some farming and at some point just finally had to throw in the towel. Actually, this, I will say that inside there you can still see the newspaper that's papered over the holes in the wall that they use. Newspapers going back to the 40s or 30s. So the railroad is another huge one, beginning especially in the early 1900s. So steam locomotives needed water, so they had to stop frequently to take on more water, and so little towns sprang up all along the rail line to supply water. In this case, we're looking at Ancho, which has a little different story, which we'll talk about. This is the old depot in Ancho. You can imagine people standing there waiting for the train. They would wait a very long time now. The train would never show up. And then a fourth one is Route 66. Obviously, other highways have been cut off over the years, but the Mother Road is a huge one. I-40 was the culprit. This is I-40 right back here. You can see that Budville, which is out near Grants, got totally cut off. So you can go actually the whole route of Route 66, as many of you know, and see the remains of restaurants and hotels, and some places are trying to make a go of it still, like the Blue Swallow in Tucumcari is doing great. But you'll also find a lot of places like the Budville Trading Company that haven't seen customers in decades. And sadly, this graffiti is pretty new. When I first started going to look at that building, I think the pumps were even still out front, and now it's definitely getting some abuse, sadly. Oh, and then there are some places that just have an entire mix of these things. Some places like Montoya, which is also new, Tucumcari, had all kinds of stuff going on. It had mining, it had agriculture, it was near the railroad, and it was actually on Route 66. And there's very little going on there. This is clearly a bar. You've got the bullet holes for real Wild West flair. And then just incredible stonework, and we'll see more of this, but these buildings have survived for decades and decades just because they were built so well. I mean, I always marvel at the time it must have taken to lay rock like that. Oh, and then I'll also mention that I consider pueblos to be ghost towns as well. They fit the definition perfectly, but I'm not going to go into them. I love to visit them and photograph them, but this is like, I'll just embarrass myself. People spend their whole careers doing this kind of stuff. But this is Pecos Pueblo, this is Chaco, just wonderful places to go. This is a bowl that I found myself at the bottom of a mesa. You can see after a rainstorm, we got all these cool pot shards there. I wanted to take it so badly, but I tucked it back where it came from, and hopefully the spirits are happy with me. So we'll just go through some examples, and a lot of these are going to be kind of nearby us. This is Lingo, which is not nearby us. This is out on the Texas border. This is the old post office. Sadly, it has burned to the ground. Someone came by with a barbecue grill on the back of their truck. They had embers that hadn't been put out, and they started fires on both sides of the road, and one of those fires burned the post office. This is Fierro, which is just north of Hanover. It is actually a complete ghost town, I think, but the church is being maintained. And a lot of these places, even if nobody's living there, the church is often very well kept. They'll have fiesta days there, and that's the time when people that know these areas can come back together and kind of talk about the old days and catch up. So there's a lot of that happening in ghost towns as well, and we'll see a few more examples of that. So as a great example of a mining ghost town, there's Chloride, which is just a little northwest of Truth or Consequences. It's a place you can actually go and stay. I think they have a little cabin or a little trailer you can stay in. So this was discovered by Henry Powell. He discovered chloride of silver there in 1879, and he was pretty quickly killed by Apaches. So he didn't do much mining, but people came after him, and by the mid-1880s, the population was 500. I have 11. It might actually be lower than 11 at this point. And then here we have the Old West hanging tree next to what I think was the saloon. No one was ever hanged from this tree. This is a real huge problem with doing this research, is that there's just a lot of mythology out there, and you just hear all kinds of things that sound great and aren't really true. So while that looks like a great hanging tree, it was not a hanging tree. So Chloride, like so many western mining towns, was hit by the Panic of 1893. That was when the government overnight switched from silver to gold, and nobody wanted to mine silver because it was basically worthless. So everybody left the silver mining towns and went to go looking for some gold mining. This is the Pioneer Store, built in 1880 and closed in 1923. This is when Varney came through here in 1981 or 1980, and this is me coming through 40 years later or something, or 30 years later. And I always wondered when he was taking this photo, if he peeked through the windows or anything like that, because when it was purchased in 1989 by Mr. and Mrs. Edmond, everything was still inside the Pioneer Store.
Wow.
It had been closed since 1923, and all the old farm implements were in there. We had children's coffins, Victorian clothing, really incredible. It is like stepping back into the 1920s or the 1910s. There's whiskey bottles that still had whiskey in them.
Wow.
It took them almost a decade to clean it up. I was told that the pigeon droppings and owl droppings were just thick on the floor, so they had to put years and years into getting it cleaned up. But it is a phenomenal place to go visit. I haven't been there since the pandemic. I hope they made it through and that they're still open. So here's another mining town. This one's on Highway 60. It's farther away though. I'm on the other side of I-25. This is Kelly, which is adjacent to Magdalena. In 1866, Colonel Old Hutchison filed 2 claims here. And then he actually jumped his friend's claim. But his friend got the name of the town. That's Kelly. So they mined silver and lead here. This town was laid out about 1870. And Kelly boomed. It says peak 3,000. This is another thing that is super hard to tease out in some of these places. 3,000 is a lot of people. It's probably too high, although a lot was going on here. So it probably is true that they had this renting of 8-hour shifts. People would work through the night as far as beds, places to sleep, because there weren't many. And there was a lot going on, because here's this big old Tribolian smelter. Here it is again, the Tribolian smelter. This is a fantastic photo from Joseph Edward Smith, who documented a lot of Socorro in the 1880s. Here we've got our miners. I don't know if you put all these together, if you would have gotten to 3,000 at any point. This is the gang at Kelly Mine. If you ever see any of his books, they're worth grabbing. They are really cool. So zinc and smithsonite provided a second wind for Magdalena. That often happens. There's usually something else that comes along and gives these towns a little bump before they finally start to really fade out. I think smithsonite is used in paint, so I think there was a paint company that was doing some mining there. And then the zinc ran out in the 1930s, and Kelly quickly became a near ghost. Here's this beautiful head frame. I believe that one was designed by the guy that designed the Eiffel Tower. And this is a great look up Main Street in Kelly in its heyday. These houses were all taken down because wood was a commodity. So once Kelly closed, people took their houses down and moved them out. So there's really nothing. You'll find a few foundations, but not much else in Kelly aside from these great mining artifacts. And you can visit Kelly. You're asked to buy a ticket at the rock shop. So if you don't want anyone to hassle you, it's worth at least stopping by the rock shop and being legit.
We never did.
But yeah, it's a cool place. And here's a third one. This is our final mining town, back to Elizabethtown. So this was originally a tent camp for gold prospectors who were working Mount Baldy. Again, this is Baldy back here. In the 1860s, it was named for the 5-year-old daughter of Captain W. Moore. He built the first house. That house is long gone. This is still here. I think that's a 1940s Mercury, somebody told me. I don't know my cars, but I'm pretty sure that's what I heard.
That looks right.
Does it look good? All right, good. I still remember. Well, here's one. So in Elizabethtown, we hear 3,000, 5,000, or even 7,000. Absolutely not. It was more like 800. Kingston by Silver City is another one that you hear was like this huge boom town with tens of thousands of people or whatever. No, much, much smaller than that. In this case, more like 800. Elizabethtown has a reputation because of the serial killer that lived there, Charles Kennedy. He would abduct travelers on the road, murder them, and put them under the floor a lot of the time. And he actually had locked his wife up in a room, and she managed to escape. She went and told people what was happening, and it said that Clay Allison, along with this mob, came out and decapitated him. And it also said that Henry Lambert hung his head outside the St. James Hotel, but Henry Lambert was actually still living in Elizabethtown at that point. So that's another way you can tease some of these facts out, by looking at who was where at what time. And sometimes people are dead when they're supposed to have done something, and that's usually a giveaway that they didn't do it. So Elizabethtown was mostly gone by 1875, but it also got a little secondary bump by the good old Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, which was a huge player in the state's history. Now in this neck of the woods, we've got agricultural ghost towns in particular. This is one that's not too far away. I think you could run down here after the talk and go and have a look at Clonch. Clonch was settled around 1890 as Dubois Flats, renamed for a local rancher named Clonch in 1930. He was okay with the town being named after him, but he did not want a saloon in the town named after him. So Clonch didn't have a Clonch saloon, but it did flourish for a time because of the same reason Mount Airy did Rage or Willard or other places in the Pinto Bean Empire, because of pinto beans, especially feeding the troops in World War I. And then just as it became Clonch and got its name, the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl arrived, and that was kind of the start of the end of Clonch. And here we've got a stove that's just out there in the desert. It looks like it's pretty vintage. So one of the cool things that happened in Clonch was the Torrance County Singing Convention, which started in 1916. And there were 4 major events held every year. This was rooted in it's a way of singing that I think is linked to shape note singing, which is a very old phonetic way of community singing of religious songs. Starting back in 1700s New England. And a yearly statewide convention in Clonch could bring 1,200 people to the village, which is really, when you're in Clonch now, you just imagine 1,200 people there. Incredible. Back here is the Pinto Bean Warehouse, which has been purchased now by a family. They use it for recreation. They go out there and unwind in Clonch in the Pinto Bean Warehouse. This is the Women's Club. So there's a little bit going on in Clonch. I think population 7 maybe? Somebody here might know the current number, but it's 7 or so. There are a ton of ghost town books on New Mexico. They're all really interesting. I'm not the first person to write a ghost town book on New Mexico, and I don't think I'm even the last person. I think there's now a newer one. But there's a lot of the same information in ghost town books. But when you find something firsthand, it's really, really cool. And this is a story from Ralph Looney, who wrote Haunted Highways in the mid-1960s. And actually went to a singing convention, probably one of the last that was held in Clonch. And so he said they sang all morning long, and then they had these just huge potlucks. And I'm not going to read all this food, but just meatloaf, mashed potatoes, yeast rolls, chocolate cake, and they just ate and ate and ate, and then they would sing for another, 3 hours or so. It sounds like joy is coming. So really big events, a lot of effort, a lot of just enthusiasm in these singing conventions, which we don't really hear much about anymore. I mean, for such a big part of history, it's largely lost. This is a WPA school in Clonch, which closed in the 1950s. It's in pretty bad shape, as are a lot of our WPA schools. There's a lot of beautiful old schools that are just shells or are not looking good. And I do like to go back to talking about, the bigger stories that ghost towns tell. Clonch has a big one because it's not that far from White Sands. And here's ground zero on the Trinity test, here's Clonch, and this is the prevailing wind. So the fallout went right over Clonch, and you'll hear people talking about their livestock turning white, or seeing that bright flash at 4:30 in the morning or whenever it was. And then sadly, a lot of people that have said, their grandparents had cancer or they have cancer, and they are trying to get some recognition for the likelihood that some of this fallout from the Trinity test is responsible for that. I think the tuberosa basin downwinders are one of the main groups that are trying to get recognition. So again, a huge story. It doesn't get much bigger than the Trinity test and the atomic bomb as far as world history. And it happened right down the road from Kosh. So here is Dunlap, which is southwest of Fort Sumner. This was settled during the early 20th century homestead boom, which we heard about a little earlier. It was founded by W.O. Dunlap. That's where it got its name. And I've heard from a number of his ancestors, which is always really cool. This is the great old community school and church. It's got this nice zia. Got the vigas up there, just great craftsmanship. Again, looking at that landscape, it's not a real surprise that homesteaders couldn't make a go of it out here. We had the Dust Bowl, and there was a second drought in the mid-1950s. It was also really hard on people. So that double whammy caused a lot of these ghost towns to really become ghost towns. The post office closed in 1961, so probably I'm thinking that's a few years after the 1950s drought, and this area kind of emptied out. There are ranchers and people that still live in this community. But the post office is gone. There's no sign of it. I think it was near the school, but I can't even see any foundations. But this school and church is really fondly, the memories are very fond. I hear from people that went to dances here, people that went to school here and church, and they would just meet in this building and talk about what was happening in the area. So a very important part of the community. It was collapsing when I was there last, and now it's collapsed even more. I think the entire roof has collapsed, and now it's just kind of like a U-shaped ruin, which is sad, because it was a neat little building. Cabazon is a gem of a ghost town. This was a Hispano-agricultural area in the Rio Puerco Valley. This is where folklorist Nazario Garcia was working. He wrote a book about his boyhood and growing up in this area. Really interesting. He's written some poetry and prose about the Rio Puerco Valley. This is just a phenomenal landscape to explore, actually. It's one of my favorites. It's just wide open and super interesting. Cabazon was settled in 1826 by Juan Mestis from Pagosa Springs, Colorado. It's associated with an older settlement called La Posta, which was on the stage stop from Santa Fe. This was an area of trade between the Navajo and Albuquerque and Santa Fe, for wool in particular. So a lot of wool was coming through here. And we're up here in Sandoval County. So here's Cabazon Peak. A lot of you have probably seen that fantastic volcanic plug, just a really great area to go hike around in. You can hike to the top of it if you're feeling brave. It doesn't seem like you could, but it's a little spooky. I did it once. It's kind of spooky, but you can do it in about 40 minutes. And you would just never guess that. So, to the Navajo, this peak was the head of a giant killed on Mount Taylor. It was the eastern edge of the Navajo world until the Spanish explored west of what they named Cabazon, or Big Head. This is a great view of it out of what was a house and a hotel.
Isn't Cabazon on private property?
I'm going to mention that, yeah, because this is interesting, because I get asked more about Cabazon than any other place. Yeah. So that house and hotel was owned by Richard F. Heller, who arrived in 1888. He bought a trading post that was already in operation in 1874, and then he built his own in 1910. And this is it right here. That's the Heller General Store. You've got these holes in the awning because he raised pigeons. So he had pigeons up there in the attic. He stayed here until his death in 1947. He was really the heart and soul of Cabazon at that point. So when he passed away, Cabazon began to decline very quickly. So I do get asked more about Cabazon. Everyone wants to go to Cabazon, and it is inaccessible unless you have an invitation. There's a little bit of controversy because the road is gated. It is a county road technically. But the one person who lives down there and ranches down there has that gated off. I got an invitation secondhand. I didn't even know who this person was. Someone just asked me. One of the great things about doing City of Dust is occasionally I'll get an invitation to to go see a ghost town, and someone just said, "Do you want to go to Cabazon with me?" I said, "Absolutely. Who are you?" He said, "My name is George. Meet me out there tomorrow." So that's how I got to Cabazon.
John, I went there, and there were 2 gates. They were both unlocked but difficult. There was no sign that said no trespassing.
Right, there isn't now.
It is now?
I don't think so.
No, there was no sign. No sign saying private property. I went there because of San Jose Catholic Church.
Right.
It's down there,
Yep.
and it's really used occasionally.
It is, right.
And then if you go farther down the road, you get to Guadalupe,
Yeah, that's a great one.
which is a real ghost town, and even farther down the road, you get to Casa Salazar, which is even, that one actually is privately owned.
Yeah. Is the chapel, was that a public chapel in Casa Salazar? There's a little chapel so this whole area just has these little settlements going all down the Virgo.
Right, so that, it is on private property. I don't know whether it was ever public, but now it is not.
Okay.
It's obviously not being used, it's still standing.
Yeah. I've always wanted to visit that. I wish I had a photo of it. It's up on top of the mesa. You can see it from down on the road.
I can give you,
Oh, that'd be great.
we can talk later about photos I can use, but I've been in all these places.
That's cool, yeah. So that's a good point. So Cabazon is an example of a place where the church is well maintained, it's been fixed up, and people go there during the fiesta. So if you can figure out when the fiesta is or when they're having a service, that would be a good time to also go and visit Cabazon. Where to get that information?
Hymns,
Oh,
hymns,
yeah.
it's certified priesthood hymns.
Is it? Okay,
Yeah.
that's the place to go. Great.
There's a book
Yeah,
by
that's
Alan
what church,
Pacheco.
I was there 3 years ago.
Oh, were you? Was that on a fiesta day?
No, actually, I knew one of the old ladies that was raised there, and she took us, and we got to go in, see the little santo and everything. that
That's
they-
great.
But, that's where I learned that it's actually that one day a year they go down is from the hymns public, from Pastor
Yeah,
Conchetta.
thank you.
There's a book by Alan Pacheco, who's a New Mexico historian, called Saints. And it's arranged by feast day. So San Jose, of course, there are tons of San Jose churches, but you can look in her book and see what the feast day is of San Jose, or any other saint that is commonly seen around here.
Right, and then go to
And
the,
that gives you an idea of when to go.
yeah.
And then you can check with the local, the closest Catholic parish, which you can figure out.
Yeah.
And they will tell you if they,
Yeah.
so there are ways to do that.
That's a good point, and I've always tried to direct people to the family and not direct them to the feast day, but in the last couple of months now, I've started saying, like, maybe it's worth trying to figure out when the feast date is, and that's the best way to go and see a place like Cabazon. This is also in the movie The Hired Hand, which is a Peter Fonda movie from the late 1960s, and you can get a really good look at Cabazon before it was in this particular shape. I think there's a shot with the gang sitting on the porch of the Heller store before it collapsed. So that's The Hired Hand. It's a good movie, good western. So railroad ghost towns, we've got a lot of those along Highway 60. So we have the AT and SF again. This is where the balloon cutoff came, right through the flatter part of the state, which was easier to get a locomotive across rather than, Raton Pass, where the grade was steep and the weather was a little bit dicey. Taiban was named for Taiban Creek. As a botanist, I know that this may refer to horsetail, which is an ancient genus of equisetum, for those of you who are interested in plants, around when the dinosaurs were around. Or it might refer to 3 creeks, so we don't actually know specifically where the name Taiban came from. Its peak population was mostly farmers, its peak population was 400, mostly farmers and sheep herders. This is a later period building, the Taiban Trading Post, but not that recent, because the last time I looked at the window, there was a Ross Perot campaign shirt hanging over that. So, still pretty old. Again, tying into bigger Wild West history, so Billy the Kid and his gang were captured near Taiban at the standoff of Stinking Springs. This is a postcard showing the house. Charlie Bowdery, Billy the Kid's pal, was shot here when he stepped through the door. They thought he was Billy the Kid. He had a hat on that looked like Billy, so they shot him. but it wasn't really the kids. So the gang holed up in here, and eventually Pat Garrett and his posse got them. They surrendered and were taken to jail in Las Vegas, I think, maybe on to Santa Fe. This structure no longer exists, but if you look aerially, you can actually see the imprint on the ground of where this stone house was. I know some people that have been out to see it. It's on a private ranch. I haven't seen it myself, but I'd like to go. But again, tying into bigger stories in the Wild West. And this is probably one of my favorite places to visit in the entire state of New Mexico. This is the famous First Presbyterian Church in Taiwan, which was completed on December 22nd, 1908. It cost $250. The Presbyterians only had 100 of that. They borrowed the rest of it from the Baptists. The first sermon was held by John R. Gass, and it was not attended. It was sparsely attended due to cold weather. If you've been out, well, even here in Mountain Area, if you've been out on the eastern plains when the wind gets whipping around Christmas, it can get very cold. So it's not too surprising that not many people showed up. But if you're out here in the evening when the wind calms down and it's nice and mild, it's just a very, very peaceful place to be. And people write prayers inside the church. They leave their recollections. It's just become a little traveler's wayside and a little bit of a memorial. Sadly, every time I see this place, it's in worse shape too. It is owned, it's not abandoned, but the person who owns it is unable to restore it, and so it's probably just going to keep deteriorating. But if you haven't seen the Taiwan Church, highly recommend it. It's a couple hours from here.
It's made of wood, is it?
It is made of wood, yeah. And the floor has been taken, so I think people went in there and somebody pulled the floor out, and I think the window sashes might be gone now. There was a piano inside, and that has been found in Texas, so go figure. Taiwan was also known for bootlegging, because West Texas was dry, and people, especially rich businessmen who had planes, would fly in from West Texas to the Taiwan International Airport, if you can believe it or not. And this was the high school, Taiwan High School. It's totally gone. There's a few bricks lying around, but it's not there anymore. The Pink Pony Saloon and Dance Hall is still there. It was known for cockfights. It had a snake pit. There's posters for it at the Billy the Kid Museum. The building is being used, at least the last I knew, for boarding horses, just a little bit east of Taiwan proper. The last church service was held in 1936, and the last business by 1960 was a bar. I believe it was Mac's Bar, which eventually burned down. That trading post looks a little bit later, so maybe it came around later. The post office is still open as far as I know. So that's the last thing that's open for business in Taiwan, would be the post office.
John, that car is about a 1945, 46 car.
This one here? They still had weddings. So this might be a wedding reception, or actually I got a couple other pictures of weddings. So it's possible they weren't having services, but maybe they were still having things like weddings and various events. So that's possible. So Yeso is also just down Highway 16. It's one of my favorites. It's really a gem. Outside Magazine, maybe 2 years ago, did a feature on one of the women that lives there. I think there's 3 or 4 people living there, and it was a feature about like, why would a woman live in a ghost town? And it's a really interesting interview with her and why she's there. It's a great place to explore. Again, this is Berlin Cutoff, so 1906. The name comes from gypsum, which refers to the water in the area which you can't drink, but perhaps you can use it for locomotives. And then in 1909, this is just a weird tidbit, it got an extra S, probably a typographical error. No one knows why it became Yeso with 2 S's. This photo I took here, this is the Mesa Hotel. I was standing about where the railroad depot was. And you can just imagine people hopping off the train, going over to the Mesa Hotel. There was a cafe in the bottom, and then all that stuff came to a stop. It turned into a frontier museum. That's not quite the right spelling of museum, but I would have loved to have seen what was in there. It was like antiques and guns. It's totally empty, and everything's been stripped out of it now. But it must have been quite a place in its heyday. So, as I was saying, like the trains, once they switched to diesel in the 1950s, they did not need to stop at all these little towns to take on water. So they had literally been engines of commerce, and And they then just roared right through places like Taiwan or Yeso. And people didn't get off the train to go to the restaurants and the hotels anymore. And then the surrounding land really wasn't great for farming. We had those 2 droughts, and so people just kind of faded away. But these structures remain. Here's another fantastic example of this stonework. This is the old Super Service gas station. Just another great ruin that's out there in Yeso. And this is really cool. So this, I looked for this on a couple different occasions and finally found it because I've been told it was out there. The person that lived in this house, which was also a hotel and a service station, put established June 8th, 1929 in bottle caps in the concrete out in front of their establishment. It was under plaster, and I finally was able to kind of clear it off and get a somewhat decent picture of it. Some of it's missing, but just an example of how much care people put into these places and what they meant to them. Really, these were special places to the folks that lived here. Ancho, which we saw a little earlier, is not Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. It was the El Paso and Northeastern Railroad. It came through the Ancho Valley around 1899. So gypsum was discovered here and was used for plaster. And then in 1905, the Ancho Brick Company was created to utilize abundant fire clay in the area. And I always think that probably this was maybe a bachelor pad for someone working at the brick company. I don't know that for sure, but that seems like it would be in the realm. So Phelps Dodge bought that brick plant in 1917, enlarged it, and shut it down following bankruptcy in 1921. So they didn't last very long. These are the beautiful Ancho #1 bricks that they produced at that brick company. You can still see them around the area. In 1954, Ancho was cut off by US 54 by over 2 miles on the route between Corona and Carrizozo. And that was really fatal. And then in 1959, when the railroad shuttered the depot, Ancho didn't stand a chance. And at that point, there was only one thing happening in Ancho, and that was this cool museum called My House of Old Things, which had been bought in 1963 by Mrs. Jackie Silvers, who opened the depot as a museum. Barney saw it, this is him in 1980, he said, "A wonderful conglomeration of all the things you thought nobody had saved." This is me coming out here in maybe I was out there in 2011 or so when I took this photo. At that point, you could still walk up and look through the windows. Most of what was inside had been sold by the family. I think it was sold on eBay, I was told, so it just kind of dispersed. There was still some cool stuff in there. And then right after this, they fenced it all off, so, to keep the riffraff like me out. Probably a good idea, actually, not to have that wide open to folks. I don't know what the status is of this right now, because this is a pretty old photo.
It's still fenced off.
Is it still fenced off?
Yeah.
You can't, yeah, it's privately owned,
Right.
not accessible.
Yeah.
And I think the building is still in good shape.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like a pretty sturdy depot.
Yeah.
So this is San Antonio. This is another one that's down near Socorro on I-25. It may have been a village as early as 1600, so going way back. Hispanos from northern New Mexico named the town after a mission in 1820, and then again, we got the AT&SF coming through, this time a little earlier in the later 1800s. This is not the passenger depot, this is the baggage and luggage depot, which is privately owned. I just happened to be there when the family that owns it was there, and so I got to go inside. There's some graffiti from people that work the trains inside. It's pretty neat. It's also a listing. You can see the pylons are not looking too good there. So the bigger story in San Antonio is the A.H. Hilton Mercantile. So this was opened in the 1880s by A.H. Hilton, and he had a little hotel in here, and his son Conrad was born in 1887, would take luggage from the train depot to his dad's hotel. This is an awesome photo. You can see these kids waving in the street here. This, I think, is still there as a private residence. It was a post office at one point as well. Just a really cool historic photo. And Conrad, of course, would go on to establish the Hilton hotel chain. So whatever he was doing in San Antonio really stuck with him. That means it's also the origins of Paris Hilton. This is what's left of the lot where the Mercantile was. I don't know if these are the original foundations or if it's a structure afterwards, but there's nothing left on the lot where the mercantile was. Sadly, there was a barn nearby where there was some graffiti from Conrad Hilton, and then somebody came and carved it out of the wall. And so you really do need to be a little careful not to publicize some of this stuff. If it's something really important or really fragile, it's best to maybe not point it out, because that was sad to hear. So finally, we've got these ghost towns of the Mother Road. Newkirk is a good example of this. This was down near Tucumcari. It's first a railroad town as well, the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific. It's named for a town in Oklahoma, which was a resident's former home. I've been to Newkirk, Oklahoma. It's also on its way to becoming a ghost town. It still has a bakery and a couple other things, but it's not doing as badly as Newkirk, which has not much going on. So with the arrival of Route 66, the population reached 240. This would be like in the mid-1920s. By the 1940s, it had 4 gas stations, 2 restaurants, Bacchus Trading Post, the post office, rental cabins, but the population was already down to 115. This is the post office here. Here's a church that has lost its steeple. I think this church is in much worse shape now. This is again from 2011 or 2013.
Yeah, the church has been vandalized. I think the steeple is gone.
I wonder if someone just took the
Yeah,
steeple.
the church was built around 1900. I think, or whatever.
Yeah, that's sad. I mean, yeah, it was a beautiful old church, really. So here's another anonymous comment I got from someone who was a Newkirk resident at 5 years old. They say, I recall the people coming through with as many as 10 people in a car, with all manner of things, chicken coops, mattresses, etc., tied atop the cars. Some of them traded possessions for gasoline. Many drove through the night when it was cooler. This is a reference to the Dust Bowl migration. So he, at the age of 5 in Newkirk, is seeing one of the biggest migrations in U.S. history as people are heading out to California. What Woody Guthrie sang about, all happening right here in the ghost town of Newkirk, which is pretty phenomenal. And I have no idea who this is. I wish they left their name, because I'm sure they have tons more stories. This is Wilkerson's filling station. It closed in 1989. It's adobe. It's in terrible shape. Every time I see it, it's in worse shape. So, you know, I've talked to ghost town aficionados, and we're all kind of feeling like we're at the end of this stuff. Like, these places are really, you know, every year more and more is lost, and you can't even see the places you saw maybe 15 years ago. So if you want to see them, you need to get out now and take a look. Not too far from Newkirk is Cuervo, which was on an old trade route going back to the 1500s. Goodnight Loving Trail is right through here as well, coming to the west. Again, Rock Island and Pacific, because we're not too far from Newkirk. Cuervo means crow. I always kind of like to know a little bit about the name, or where the name of the village came from. In this case, a reference to a hill about 9 miles northwest. Here's one of these artsy photos taken with that plastic camera we saw at the beginning of the talk, with very cheap film, but I really like this kind of stuff. I just like the happy accidents. I like, you know, the unpredictability of film. So in 1910, you've got cattle and sheep kind of moving into the area, getting a little bit of a population build, and then you get Route 66 in the 1920s with 2 of everything: schools, churches, doctors, hotels. Here we've got the post office and grocery store. And this beautiful old school, the District No. 6 school, built around 1930, closed 1958, this beautiful stonework. This is 2013. I stepped inside and it was just a phenomenal, like, the pictures don't do it justice. It was this great gold patina. The wall behind me was red. There was a wood stove here, a wood stove behind me. You can see the outline of the chalkboard there on the wall. There was the outline of the chalkboard on the back. Really, really just a evocative place to be standing. But even at that point, it had been bought by an elderly lady for about $10,000, and she was restoring it. So this scene is now gone. A roof was put on. It's great that it's protected. I don't actually know what she was using it for, if she was living in there, and I'm not sure what the status is now, because obviously that's a good 13 years ago now. So I'm not sure where it's at. But
John,
mm-hmm.
My family's originally from Cuervo, on
Yeah,
the
right.
royal side of the family, and we went for a family reunion, and she was there working on it at that time. That's been 5 years ago now.
Cool.
But
Was she living there, or was she using it for?
She was staying in it part-time at that point, but I
That's
don't know,
great.
yeah.
I mean, I love to see, I mean, even though as much as I love this scene, I'm glad that people are shoring these places
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
And,
And she fixed it up, she was fixing it up really nice.
yeah, the roof looks great, and the windows are in
Yes,
there. Yeah, that's
yes.
great. Good to hear. So this is a third one. This is Blue Water. This one's out near Drains. This was what the Navajos called this area, large cottonwood trees where water flows out. This is a good example of a town from the trading post area of western New Mexico, eastern Arizona. Route 66, brought people from the east who'd never been to the desert. They'd never seen Native American art. This was all very exotic. Many had never seen rattlesnakes, apparently. This is the rattlesnake trading post. You can still see rattle, and there's the SN. This building was bought in 1946 by Jane and Maxine Atkinson. And she brought in reptiles, including the largest collection of cobras in the country at that point, which is pretty hard to believe. And when you look at this, it's so nondescript. And then you find a photo like this. And it was just hopping. This came from Blue Miller, she's a great historian on Route 66, so thanks to her for sending this to me. And nobody knows what happened to it. It was bought by Maxine Atkinson's sister in 1951, and then its history just kind of disappears. Obviously, eventually it went nowhere, but how it went from this to this is a mystery. But it really looks like it was quite the place in its heyday.
I guess.
So that's just a quick overview of the ghost towns of New Mexico, how we got them. There's so many more. I could easily do a second volume if I didn't have a day job. I've got the material, I've got the photos. There's a lot more history out there. But just to kind of finish up and maybe get some ideas for questions and conversation, this is the Fraser School down near Roswell. I just keep showing these buildings that are just this fantastic stonework, just really amazing. And this will be here for another 150 years if nothing crashes into it. You can't really see it, but they put words up there. It says water above the cistern. There's a few other words around the building that they put in there with stone. This one's probably familiar. This is Cedar Vale. So why do we love ghost towns? When I first started taking pictures in Augusta of old buildings, I thought I was the only person doing it. I thought this is really strange to go out and take pictures of these old, deteriorating places. Well, and then, now with the internet, we know that tons of people love this stuff. It really fascinates us. I always stop and take a picture of this place when I'm near Cedar Vale, Danger Snakes building. Is this still, did it collapse?
Collapsed.
It's gone, oh no.
There's still remnants of it, but it's pretty rough.
Another one down.
Yeah, so I laugh about this picture because you did it, real good timing.
Yeah.
It must have been in the last 2 or 3
Yeah,
years, right?
yeah.
Another one down.
Just the last couple of years. And the Cedar Vale School also,
Is it?
it's really starting to
Yeah,
go.
I love that danger of snakes.
Yeah.
Danger snakes, yeah. Yeah. Well, it's really true. You do have to get out there because they are going
Yeah.
day by day, yeah.
Yeah, is it Adobe, it's just, it's all.
It's not holding up, yeah. So here's a dreamy photo of the Mission Church of Santa
That's
Costa
cool.
in Socorro County, and just, are we kind of longing for times we never knew? There's a Portuguese word for this called saudade, which is a very romantic nostalgia for a time that may have never existed. Just a time and a place that we imagine and we associate with these places, but it might not be reality. That's portrayed in the dreaminess of the photo. Are we looking for a vanished lifestyle and economy when you used to know the person at the corner store? You had a relationship with them. This is the Curry Mercantile in Durand. This is Anton Curry out here. This has, sadly, so he was murdered by a band of robbers who broke in the evening into his store. They killed him. They shot and wounded his wife. His son drove them out by throwing canned goods at them. This is phenomenal. They were captured. I think one escaped to New Mexico, but they were the last judicial hangings in the state. I think 3 of them were hung in the 1920s, and they were the last to be hanged. And that all happened because of this. Here it is in a more recent photo. Looking at that, you would never know, and I didn't know. I took that photo, and when I began to research, I was like, wow, that's incredible that all that stuff happened there. You can't really read it in the photo, but there's still it still says feed and seed and some of the remnants of the ghost sign up there on the top. And then I do think we're attracted to the fortitude of these people and the courage it took to come out to what I've heard referred to as the Great American Desert and just try to start a new life. and try to make go of it and make something for themselves. And it was often extremely difficult and tragic, and people were not able to make a go of it in a number of cases, as we've seen. This is the Negra Cemetery. I'm sure we've all been to cemeteries where we've seen, you know, entire families that have died in the same year because of influenza or because of tuberculosis. And until recently, we didn't know what that was like, but now we've gone through a pandemic and have some idea of what it's like to live through those kinds of historic times. And these things do always remind me that everything changes and nothing is really permanent. And we're seeing that in, you know, even people that live in Malibu or in the Smoky Mountains near Asheville. Some of them have to change their way of life. Some of them have to leave the places they've loved. I imagine that the person that built this schoolhouse in Hickory, they might have thought kids would be going to this school for hundreds of years, or maybe, you know, they just thought, of course, this is going to be here forever. It's now marooned out in the middle of the forest, but it's still a beautiful, beautiful structure. With these logs, they had dances in there as well. I've heard from some people that went to dances out there. Hickory is a total ghost town. There's the school, and I think the old assay office might still be there as well. But that's a great old school. And then sometimes, you know, I just say all this stuff and pontificate, and I just go all full circle back to the photography, and just people can bring their own associations and their own feelings, and just kind of, sometimes words don't even do these places justice. And here is a great recent success story. So this is the Amistad School in Union County, WPA school built in 1937, as you can see. They last year had a fundraising effort called Circling the Wagons. And they had country singers come and sing, they had events out front, they raised enough money to fully restore and shore this school up for the foreseeable future. You can now have wedding receptions in it. There's actually a church nearby. So you can have events here, and this one has been saved, which is great news. It's a gem, and we definitely need more success stories. And then as far as the aesthetics of these places, we've seen these great stone structures and really beautiful workmanship. I've got the CVS by my house that's empty. I'm not going to go photograph it. It's just down the street, but it's boring. It could be anywhere. So I don't think anyone is going to photograph the abandoned Walmarts of 2025. It's just, something will have changed if I'm out taking one. And then I do end by pointing out that this reflects a real issue in rural New Mexico and rural America, for that matter. I'm in Oklahoma right now. It's the same in Oklahoma, where rural areas are really struggling to keep their economies and their populations. And in New Mexico, it's predicted that 11 of 33 counties will keep declining by 2040. They're actually already in decline. And these are the rural counties. It's not the Sandoval's and the Bernalios. And only about 20% of the U.S. is rural now. That's 56 million people versus 280. Percentage-wise, 100 years ago, you would have flipped that around, and most people were living in a rural environment.
Excuse me, John. I want to emphasize you're talking about population, not area.
I'm talking about population, yes. Yep. Absolutely. And actually percentage in this case, not obviously the population is much higher than it was back then. And the population in a lot of rural areas is aging, and it's been difficult to get young people to come back or even to stay on the farm or learn new skills and then bring them back to the rural areas. There was a little bit of a reversal during COVID. People could work remotely. Real estate was cheaper in a lot of places, and they thought, well, we'll go to some places where it's just easier to live. I don't know that that's picked up much steam in the years since the pandemic. Maybe we'll see more of that in the future for one reason or another, but there certainly is a lot of beautiful real estate to be had in a lot of rural areas. Beautiful homes, great places to live, but also difficult to find work and to make a go of it. This is the Corona Trading Company, established in 1902. Sadly, it closed a few years ago. This is the proprietor out here. Through the magic of the internet, I think we're probably all sick of the internet most of the time. But when I took this picture, I had no idea who that was, but I've been in touch with her, and she's sent me messages. I've sent her books and things like that. So it's really cool to be in touch with some of the people who work in these places or own these places, and they tell me a lot more. I do have a Facebook page going, and I got an Instagram. I've been doing the Facebook page for a long time. You can send me recollections, photos, anything that's on your mind here. I still do the blog. I still post histories, but I just need more time. I got a lot of stuff to post, and sometimes it's just easier to do a quick post on Facebook just to kind of keep things moving. So that's pretty much all I've got. I want to say thank you to the Manzano Mountain Art Council for having me back almost 10 years later, almost a decade. Thanks to Dixie for getting in touch and for getting me down here in the first place. Thanks to Ann Ravenstone also for contacting me and getting the logistics going. Thanks to Philip Barney for letting me steal all his stuff, even though he doesn't know it. A big thanks to Bob Julian. All the place name stuff is from him. He's become a really good friend. He couldn't make it today. He's got a new edition of the place names of New Mexico coming out. It's got updates, so watch for that. We've had some good times exploring. I wish he was here. And then thanks to the countless senders of memories and photos. A few of you are actually here, so that's great. But most of this stuff is, like I said at the beginning, the history's not out there, and so hearing from the people that live in these places is the best way to really document them. And thanks to all of you for coming down. I know some of you came from Albuquerque, which is awesome. Thanks for your time. And questions, comments, I'm here all night long, literally.
Just two things. I'd also like to say thank you to the Schaefer Hotel because your room is complimentary.
Yes, thank you to the Schaefer. I hope it's haunted.
And I'd also like to say this building was built in 1910.
That's right. This is the perfect place for this talk. Yeah. Not that I minded the missions, but this is perfect.
So I did record this presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes.
Our marketing person for the Montana Mountain Art Council is on vacation right now. So check our website in a couple of weeks and the video will be there.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes.
I think fine.
I love this talk, thanks, John. It's amazing how similar our histories are, although you must be 50 years younger than I am. Including an advanced degree in biology, which I have.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
And I've been in every place that you spoke about, most of which have churches, which is what drew me there. So this was a lovely sort of recap of the stuff we're doing. Also, I agree with you about Robert Julian. I couldn't have done my work without him. He's just wonderful. And Dixie Boyle has been a great provider of information and encouragement. So I hope I get a chance to talk to you for a few minutes.
Yes.
We have so much in common.
Let's definitely talk. And I met Dixie because of her Highway 60 book, which I highly recommend. Highway 60 is actually one of my favorite highways. I would prefer to go up and down Highway 60 rather than Route 66.
Sometimes in Phoenix,
Right, and even into Oklahoma.
yeah.
It's just really cool going into Oklahoma.
It's the only actual road still goes from coast to coast. I've been to both ends.
Have you done the whole route?
No,
I
I
wanted
flew
to.
into Norfolk and went into Virginia Beach, where it ends on the east side, it starts.
Yeah.
And I've been in LA where it goes in.
That's awesome.
20 and 40 go all the way.
Not exactly, but it's, Highway 60 is an original coast-to-coast highway.
There's so
And
much
it is
cool
coast to
stuff.
coast.
Yeah, give that a shot. The state job's a real problem.
Well, 60 was called like the coast to coast or ocean to ocean highway, remember at one
Coast to
time.
coast, ocean to ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
Where is the Amistad in Union County? My mother grew up in Union County, and I've not seen that building.
How would I describe it? So Amistad is actually tucked off the highway. It's a little cluster, a small cluster of buildings. There's the church, there's a couple houses. I think there's maybe one person living there, and a fire department of all things. I would have to look. I'd have to double check what the highway is. I can tell you the wrong highway. But it's kind of up in that area by, not Narragansett is a great example of for a road map. But it's up in, it's going to be southeastern Union County, so it's not
I've got the Devon Atlas in my car. if you want
Yeah,
to
we
look
could
at
take a look at that. Yeah, it's hard to describe where, and you could easily miss it. You could easily be in that area and not know that you need to turn off the highway to get to where this is. Yes?
Do you own that place?
I do not own that place. I'd like to.
Okay.
That's Monticello, yeah.
I think in your book you meant that you purchased a place there, didn't you?
I think I said I wanted to. I wanted to purchase. There is a beautiful old general store in Monticello.
Yes,
Looking in the
there
windows,
is.
it had the nice vigas, it was all painted blue, it was totally empty. And I would still like to buy that. Monticello is kind of interesting because somebody moved there from Los Angeles and started an artisan balsamic vinegar operation there. So there is a little bit going on there. But that particular building you're mentioning, I don't have a picture of it in here, but if someone wants to give me that building. Yes?
That picture at the beginning of the convent in Roy, is that something you took?
Yeah, yep.
I've been to Roy maybe 5 or 6 times, never seen it, look for it. Can you kind of tell me where it's at?
Yeah, so this is interesting because we were just in Roy recently and we did not go to the convent, and if you don't go looking for it, you won't see it. So it's at the northern edge of Roy, at the far eastern corner. So you have to actually kind of go through the town and then head east. And you can, if you know what you're looking for, you can see it off the highway, but it's going to be a little distance. I mean, there still is, I think, a church operating, because it was a Catholic, obviously a Catholic convent, and there's still a school or some kind of religious building next to it. And that's how I know some of the history, because they happen to be repainting the building next to it. And you can still see the pathway that the nuns walked from the convent over to the buildings. Soil is still pretty eroded. It's kind of got to watch for it. You won't see it if you're not looking for it, even though it's a huge.
But it's not, as far as you know, it's not like on private property.
No, I mean, we didn't, well, so we did see someone there, and we asked him if we could go and take a look. I mean, you can walk around it, you'll probably see somebody there, you can talk to them. And if not, that picture was taken from a pretty good distance away, but we did go up and look at it. So, yeah, you can see it from Google Earth too. You can just look at that northeastern quadrant of Roy and see it from there.
No, I often thought that we, people like you and me, are living in exactly the right era for doing this. A lot of the buildings are still there, they don't be very long.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we've got the internet, we've got Google Earth,
Yeah.
all these things that help us find them. We can do a very extensive survey of all this stuff now. This would be very hard to have done, say, 40 years ago. And will be less productive 40 years from now because a lot of these things aren't going to be there.
Not going to be there.
So we live in a sort of a golden age.
And there's a trading post, the Puertecito trading post that was part of the Great Berlin train robbery, where like the people that robbed the train stopped and had sardines and wine at the train post. And it was so hard to find. We went there and photographed the wrong place. And we're like, wait a minute, this is right. And using Google Earth and aerial photography, you're like, wait a minute, we were here, and the ruins are there. And that's what enabled us to actually find the right place. So you're exactly right. Anybody else? Like I said, I'm here all night, so if you want to come up and talk to me afterwards, feel free. Thank you again.